So with us today, we've still got Dame Judith Hackitt and Marc Fleming. We've been talking a great deal about the impact that the built environment sector has on society as a whole and how we can influence that in both directions. What we're going to do is move on to talking about how we inspire the next generation, about how we identify the talent and bring that talent on board in such a way that they can lead change and influence the sector to overcome some of the inertia that we've been talking about before. I'd like to take a slightly different direction or a development of this and think about how we support the next generation around facilitating this culture shift. So as a university, we have quite an interesting demographic in our student base. We have a lot of people who have years of service and years of good value in the industry who are coming and looking to gain a qualification. We also have a lot of younger applicants who are looking to enter into the construction industry or real estate or the sector, and increasingly are very invested, particularly in sustainability, but the whole concept of well-being and how this is more than building buildings. It's actually about building communities and building a supporting society and all the rest of it. How do we, us as an institution, but how do we as an industry, as a sector, actually facilitate that for young people who are more junior in their influence in their job roles, but have these ideas and this drive to make the world better? How do we support that? Marc, I'll come to you first as the frontline educator in this.
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, if I look at education, it's quite a safe space. It's a safe space to learn. There's no risk with decision making. So we've got a really good opportunity in the sector, and there's a lot of good practice going on in the sector in terms of supporting the next generation into roles where, they're coming to university or college to not just get skills in a particular discipline, in a particular field, but we're focusing much more on the broader meta skills in terms of leadership, team working, having much more responsibility for the broader themes that we've discussed today in terms of understanding their global citizenship and such like. So we need to start continue on that trajectory and continue on that journey, and the professional bodies that we work with are extremely supportive in that regard. But one of the biggest challenges we have is when a lot of graduates go into industry, that is punched out of them and they're de-skilled because of inertia. So industry's got a massive, massive part to play in changing that culture shift, because I believe that the educational world is doing that. We are responding to literature because we've got a safe space. We're not delivering a program to make money. We're delivering a program to support the next generation. So the incentive for us is to supply industry with people with the requisite skills that industry needs. And the challenge is that industry needs to reciprocate that by continuing that journey. And that's perhaps where I'm not saying there's a disconnect, but there could probably be more connections made between academia and industry in terms of supporting that pipeline of talent into industry and into jobs so that they're ready. We're making a lot of graduates ready to make an impact. And quite often we need to, in construction in particular, it's about, the length of service tends to be the person that has all the knowledge and all the answers. But actually what the sector needs is, is people with new ideas, new leadership skills, so that they can embrace the challenges that the sector faces. I mean, safety is one, sustainability is another. Digital transformation is, unprecedented level of digital transformation at present. And that is one of the keys to unlocking a lot of these challenges, the utilisation of digital tools. We go to the golden thread in terms of managing information throughout a project, life cycle. These are just some little themes that the next generation should be able to dovetail very nicely into industry and actually make the changes and facilitate that change in culture. But it takes time, and that's one of the biggest challenges we have. Is we want the changes now, and it needs to happen now. But there is that little bit of succession planning that's required. There's natural wastage in the sector, and the age demographic of the construction sector over the next few years will start looking a lot younger, and that's something that we need to, manage that change as well, because, as good as we are at preparing persons to come into industry, there is a fine balance between, putting all these great ideas into practice, but actually there's an operational that's an impact on the operational side of things that needs to be managed by industry. So that's something we really need to focus on going forward.
I think part of my answer to that question would be, I think as educators, you have a hugely important role to play in both giving them the confidence to know what the right thing is, and to believe that they have the right to question the poor practices that they will come across. And part of that is about helping them to ask the right questions. The first important question is to find out who you're going to work for and ask the right questions of your employer. Choose your employer wisely, be discerning. Recognize that this isn't all about just getting a job. It's about working for an organization whose values and whose mission align with where you want to be and who seem to be heading in the right direction. So choosing your employer wisely is the first step. And even then, when you're in there and you come across old and entrenched practices, giving them the confidence and empowering them to ask incisive questions about, why are we doing this? Why is that still the way this is done? Why can't we do something different? Why can't we do this? That's the most important thing I think you can do to help them, as well as providing them with the knowledge, of course.
Yeah, I suppose it's a balance between the knowledge of as is and how it has been, with the knowledge of how it could be.
Yes.
And the skills to be critical thinkers, to be negotiators, to be leaders. I think it sometimes it will be a brave soul who will transition from that safe environment of education into being the most junior person on a project, but also the loudest voice for saying, "Well, is this the best we can do? Isn't there more we could do here? Can we not think bigger than this?"
Yeah, if I could maybe come in on that point, Mike, I think, we're in a war for talent in our sector. We're competing against a range of other sectors that are very fast moving, and from a, societal perspective might be much more lucrative, propositions. So we really need to, let new entrants and come back to our own recruitment as an institution. We need to be seen to be attractive. We need to make ourselves more attractive to new entrants, because the skill sets that we now require in our industry. I go back to my time at school. You went to construction, if you're a boy and you were good at practical stuff, and you generally, didn't like doing literature, as a very raw analogy there. But what we look at now, the skill sets that we require in construction, in our industry, with data management, as an example, something that was unfathomable, even 10, 15 years ago. So we really need to think a lot, really differently about who we are recruiting. And it's only through having positive role models within industry to actually celebrate what they do, and that comes from a whole host of different backgrounds, cultures, to really make an impact on that. So we have the sector as a whole has a big job to make it more attractive, to get the right people in, and as Dave Judith says, the people to ask those awkward questions, the people to say, what your company stands for, I don't agree with. And we're starting to see a lot more of that now, as people are very, very selective of who they want to work for, because they want to align themselves with a brand. They want to align themselves with values. And, I'm a firm believer in, being able to go into an organisation and have an influence, shape the direction of travel. And I think, I could look at, myself, I'm never ever going to have all the answers. So industry needs to think about, surround yourself with people who are going to think differently. Surround yourself with people, and nurture people so that they can, be in your shoes one day and make a transformational impact. And the industry is a juggernaut, but I do believe we are making slow changes that will, over time, I hope, lead to a much more prosperous and future for the sector.
I think, speaking as someone who has probably been conscious of the fact for a lot of my career that I think differently from other people, one really practical point in all of this is that maverick thinkers, if you like, different thinkers, need support. And as educators, I think it would be interesting for you to think about how you can provide that support, perhaps in conjunction with professional bodies beyond graduation, so that when they're out there, sticking their head above the parapet, asking those awkward questions, when they do get knocked down, which they will from time to time, where can they go to get that support, to pick themselves back up again, to be reassured they're doing the right thing, so they get back on track and get back out there fighting for the cause.
I agree. I think it's really important that we as all universities, it's not a UCM specific thing, that we recognise we're neither the start nor the end of this. In a lot of ways, the future of the sector is grounded in the views of 17-year-olds now, 16-year-olds, 15-year-olds who are thinking about their career options. To Marc's point about how the sector makes itself attractive to this talent that we need to be able to drive improvement, drive culture change, drive success in the future, but also how beyond the point of graduation into whether it's chartered membership or ongoing professional development, actually how we actually support networks of mavericks or like-minded thinkers who are maybe unique within their employer but not unique across horizontal across the sector. How we can pull that together through ongoing professional development, not just of knowledge and content, but around skills and thinking, and this kind of thing. It is something we work on. We do outreach into schools, we do outreach into FE. We try and join those dots. As to, again, we're not unique in this. It's part of what the education sector does, but it's really important to have that thread going all the way back into the early classroom, to say, actually, there are some really good prospects here for changing the world, for changing the future, for making it a better place, for moving us beyond the minimum standards of it not falling down on your head, to actually having a positive impact. So I think it's really, really important. It's certainly something we're very sensitive to.
I would also add to that, Mike, that if we look at our sector's quite a visible industry. You don't have to go into a building to see what we do day in, day out, and quite often that could be a positive, but it could also be a negative. And as we look towards the future, the future of construction-based operations is not necessarily, in fact, it is now. It's not all attributed to site-based operations. We look at off-site construction. We look at the kind of industrialisation of our industry. Precision manufactured housing as an example. So these people, if you're in the north of Scotland like I am earlier on this week, the last thing you'd be wanting to do is go outside and with a and a tent site, it was freezing. And these are things that actually put people off our industry. But people need to open their eyes a little bit wider to see, well, actually that's one small part of our industry that you see. You don't see the activities that go on that precede that, the activities that go on concurrently with that. So the industry over time, I hope, will really start, promoting the different approaches to construction, the different approaches to, design, and indeed, how we as a society continue to, push the boundaries of, making the developments much more, kind of people-centric.
And I think as well that kind of awareness raising will help with some of what we were talking about earlier on around raising the expectations that end users and clients have, because actually you begin to appreciate what could be different going forward and different in the future. We've talked about regulation. We've talked about culture change within the industry. Where do the two of you think we are, or the non-regulatory bodies, the membership organisations, and the sort of the industry bodies are in terms of leading on this at the moment? Not wishing to point any fingers particularly, but are we moving in the right direction there?
Yes, but at a glacial pace. I think my honest opinion is they're pretty complacent. I have tried hard over the last 7 years to get lots of the different professional bodies to step into this space. There's done a lot of work being done, and I give them all credit for the work they've done around defining competence, which is a step in the right direction. But when it comes to actually being prepared to accredit and discern between the good and the bad, there are very few that are brave enough to step into that space. And when you look at what the public inquiry is talking about now in terms of some of those professions in particular being licensed, I think that's a reflection on all of those professional bodies and their lackadaisical attitude towards CPD right now, which is about handing out certificates for turning up, not for truly acquiring new skills and being assessed in terms of that competence. It's a real warning shot to us all about the need for professional bodies to step up and be much more disciplined about their approach to measuring and accrediting competence.
It feels like as well that fragmentation at that level is part of the problem.
Oh, without a doubt, because some of the good practices that do go on within some of those professional bodies do not get shared. They do not get passed on. I see that a lot. If you look across broader industry sectors, that important learning and good practice that's been instilled in some disciplines and is equally applicable to others doesn't get shared.
So is the solution to this about everybody playing nicely together and breaking down some of these walls and these sort of competitive perceptions, or is there a need for one overarching built environment industry body?
I think my preference would be the play nicely option, but there's a lot of vested interests that have to be given up to make that happen.
Yeah.
I think the counter argument is one of I don't necessarily think one overarching body is the right thing, because this isn't going to be achieved through lots of bureaucracy and so on. But I think the message behind the public inquiry is, if you don't get there voluntarily, we're going to regulate you. The inquiry calls for more and more regulation. So the message is out there: sort yourselves out, work together better, show some leadership. Otherwise, you will face even more regulation, and it will have been brought on by your own inertia.
Marc, your view?
Yeah, I completely agree with Dame Judith there. There is a lot of self-preservation that happens across our industry. But if we look at our professional bodies themselves, in fact, before we look at them, if we look at, if we take a moment to think about, principal contractor and principal designer, we're talking about strict liability here of these organisations, in terms of building safety, ultimately being that one conduit of responsibility. If we think about that, look at our bigger projects, you might find that from a strict liability perspective, it might not stand up in the UK court of law, because you're dealing with, as Judith said, someone in the Cayman Islands or consortiums that are abroad. So from a professional body perspective, who are international, they are duty-bound under the professional codes of conduct, in my opinion, to act accordingly in that respect. So for me, the professional bodies should already have the mechanisms to penalise and to remove people from the register who are ultimately, flouting the laws. So that, for me, that mechanism exists. The extent to which it is being applied, I don't have the answer, and I don't have the evidence to say either way that is happening. But for me, that should be there. But if it's not, as Dame Judith said, then there needs, they need to be responsible to the building safety regulator in terms of the management of that, and that's something that I would say the professional bodies would not necessarily like, was to be told what to do by another organisation. But if we're at a point where strict liability is not working, then we need to think a little bit differently and actually hold the professional bodies to account.
Is the information available for them to act in such a way so that for a professional body to remove someone from their register, do they have clear visibility of anybody who is falling short of expectations?
That exists. That exists. I, as a chartered architectural technologist myself, I get my monthly magazine, and it is publicised who has been up in front of the, who's been brought up for breaches of codes of conduct. So that exists, and look at other professional bodies; they publicise that. Usually, that's public domain. That access, and that could be for minor infringements or ones that end up in a court of law that are that are dealt with by the Crown prosecution as opposed to professional bodies themselves. So for me, that exists. The extent to which that is being applied consistently, I don't know.
Yeah, I just wonder if each body can see over the fence enough to see somebody who's been disbarred by each other, and whether that's joined up enough.
The challenge, of course, with that system, I mean, I agree with Marc. Where people are members of professional bodies, where they are chartered, that code of conduct exists. Does it get called upon? Yes, from time to time, but nowhere near enough. But the bigger problem, of course, is all the people out there who are practicing, who are not even members of professional bodies. And that brings you back to the whole market and whether or not the clients and the principal contractors demand proof of competence and proof of commitment to those sorts of codes of conduct before they take people on. You have to tweak the whole system to make this work, because there are too many people out there practicing who are not even covered by those codes of conduct because they've never signed up to it.
That's a big challenge. Certainly in the subcontracting market itself, that is huge. And I would say principal contractor duties really need to go down to subcontractor duties as well, and actually be made legislative, because at the construction phase, that principal contractor is that point of responsibility, who's, you would say, should be diligent in who they are embarking with on a subcontract basis, or for the execution of a project. Subcontractors have subcontractors. Subcontractors have consultants. So it becomes this spider's web of anyone could be in that without the principal contractor and that nominated person actually knowing about it, or going through the necessary safe checks. And that is where the deregularized part of our industry is, and that's something that really needs to change.
Go on then. How does that change happen?
Well, that when I said earlier that I don't think we yet fully understand the extent of the change that's being driven by the Building Safety Act, this is exactly what we're talking about. Okay, so the very fact that the regulator now asks questions about, convince me that this is okay, that will translate into questions about, when you engage this subcontractor, how did you know they were competent to do what you asked them to do? It's no longer, and those are important questions that the duty holders in the new system are going to have to start thinking about. And when they procure those services from subcontractors, they've got to recognise that they're going to be the ones answering the question of the regulator about, how did you assure yourself that you had the right things and you took on the right people and you use the right materials. And those are going to be difficult questions to answer if you haven't changed the way you approach some of these things from the accepted practice today.
To what extent are the responsible individuals in this going to turn around and say, actually, yes, but this is all adding cost, and that's running counter to all of the good things that we've been talking about by increasing? I absolutely accept the point, by doing things we should have been doing all along, but they haven't been done in some cases, and some of that's for commercial imperatives. How do we balance that?
To some extent, I have a real problem with that argument about cost.
Okay.
I've heard it all my working life in relation to health and safety. Health and safety costs a lot to do. No, it doesn't. Not if you do it properly. It actually saves money as well as saving lives. And the saving lives bit is of primary importance, but the other bit is equally important. It doesn't cost a lot. Also, in the new regime, if you get stopped from proceeding to the next stage in the process, that's going to be very costly, especially if you get to the point where you've built a building and the regulator says you can't put people in there because that means you can't sell them or you can't transfer them on to the operator to rent them out and so on. So you have to create disincentives for poor behaviour, which we've done, to balance out that sense of more cost. But we also do have to challenge that basic assumption that it costs more to do it right in the first place, because it doesn't.
Over the longer term of the piece of work.
I was just going to say really that evidence suggests that subcontracting was where the profit margins are higher. So what's the excuse? In my opinion, subcontracting, you're using someone else's money. The profit margins tend to be a little bit higher in the subcontracting field. So I don't buy into that argument that it, like Judith said, that it costs more. It doesn't. And again, it goes back to rephrasing the argument. We're valuing money over life. Profit margin should be based on the impact that you've had on a project to make a fairer society, to preserve life. Rather than, how much profit that's been made.
Briefly, if I could ask each of you to sort of provide your nutshell manifesto going forward from here, from where we are to where we need to get to. And by all means, take a moment to pause and think about this. How do we improve quicker? And how do we absorb the changes that are necessary and that have been outlined and the things we've been talking about? How do we move this forward as a sector, as an industry? Dame Judith, I'll come to you first when you've had time to develop that manifesto in your head.
I talk about it a lot. I shouldn't need to rehearse it. So for me, first and foremost, it's about recognising that a major change has now taken place in the regulatory framework. It is going to demand that need for different behaviours. You can either choose to do that willingly, or you can be held to account for that, and that is going to be painful if you choose to do it via the "I'll do it if you make me" approach. So it really is about, I think, focusing on this purpose, recognising that past behaviours have been unacceptable, and unjust. You simply cannot justify what's been happening in the past. So it is time to step up and do the right thing. And that's about leaders. And we need many more people to be prepared to take those leadership positions. And don't mistake leadership for seniority. Leaders can exist at every level in an organisation, but we need those who recognise that the criticality of that purpose and rebuilding trust in the sector as being something we can all contribute to.
Thank you. That feels clear. Marc, your turn.
As an educator, obviously investing in emerging talent is a big one, but I think we've covered quite a bit of that today. I would probably say it's client behaviour. Clients need to be more aware of the responsibilities and the influence that they have on a project. They can drive behavioural change. It's down to them to insist on it in procurement, in the tendering process, so that people who are organisations who are engaging with that client, the expectations are set out very clearly at the start. So for me, we need to educate clients in terms of their responsibilities and the opportunity that they have got to drive behavioural change across our industry. I think for me, that comes back to that lifelong learning piece, Mike, that we're all invested in. We're not here to churn out graduates, just to turn out graduates. We're here to continue, to support professionals on their continuous professional development journey across their whole entire careers, and that comes down to education. It comes down to training, and it comes down to using that as a vehicle to to change culture.
Thank you, Dame Judith Hackitt, Marc Fleming. Thank you both for joining us today. It's been a fascinating insight into a detailed and far-reaching topic. Certainly, I feel I've learnt things today, which is always good. I would just ask anybody who's listening, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then please do subscribe. We are available in all the usual channels, Spotify, YouTube, and so on. This has been Be Sustainable, and hope to welcome you all again back soon. Thank you.